In our second lesson on Revelation, the lesson for July the 26th, we're looking at the most familiar part of the book of Revelation and, in a sense, the easiest to understand, and that is the letters to the seven churches in Revelations 2 and 3. Revelation 2 and 3. Now, that doesn't mean that the lesson is going to be easy to teach. In fact, this is one of the hardest lessons in this quarter to teach, not because the material is complex, but because the text covers two whole chapters, isolated verses in those chapters. I want to do the best I can to help you prepare to teach this to the class, but it's not going to be easy. I just want to forewarn you. A little bit of background. It's not on your outline, but a little bit of background. First of all, the seven churches. Why did Jesus address these letters to the seven churches? Some people think that these were the seven most prominent churches of that day, although we don't really know that for certain. Probably the seven is symbolic. It's the idea of, seven is the idea of complete. So he uses the seven churches to represent the whole church, the complete church, and therefore this is a message that Jesus is giving to the complete church or the whole church. I think that's the best way to understand it. Although these letters are written to a particular age, that is the first century world when they were written, we need to recognize that they also contain encouragement and warnings for the church of every age. And I think that's where these lessons will apply to us. And I'll point that out as we go through. In other words, these letters are not only historical, they're also prophetical, and they can benefit us as well. Now, the other thing I wanted you to notice is that each letter has 7 parts with very little variation. Now, this is not on your outline, but if you want to, turn your sheet over for a moment, if you have that outline sheet, and let me just identify these parts. Number 1, the church is identified. Look, for example, Revelation 2:12. To the angel of the church in Pergamum. That's the first part. Number 2, the speaker is identified. These are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. Number 3, knowledge of the church is expressed. I know where you live, verse 13. Number 4, the speaker then announces his verdict. Jesus announces his verdict. We see that in verse 14. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. Number 5, Jesus follows this with a command. He says repent therefore, verse 16. Repent therefore, otherwise I will soon come to you. Then he gives a promise. He says in verse 17, to him who overcomes, I will give him some of the hidden manna. And then somewhere in each of the letters is the general exhortation, he who has the ear to hear, let him hear. Now, that form that I've just gone over is the same form that is used in all of these 7 letters. But here's the key as we get into the text itself. Our text does not cover all of one letter. It does not cover all of those parts of the letter, but rather our text, and you'll notice them at the top, verse 7 of chapter 2, verse 11, verse 17, verse 26, 29, and then in chapter 3, verse 5, verse 12, verse 21. The text for this lesson zeroes in on the promise given to each of those churches. So in your outline, 7 churches, I have 7 Roman numerals, identify the 7 churches, and under each of those Roman numerals, I will give you just a brief idea of the church, identification of the church, and then we'll focus on those key verses, which is in parentheses there in each Roman numeral. We'll look at the key word of promise to each of these churches. All right? Are you ready for some revelation now? Let's try to jump in this. Number 1, the church at Ephesus. Now, Ephesus is a church that was known for its great wealth. It was one of the wealthiest cities in the ancient world. And along with that wealth, its culture, its commerce, its politics, and most important, its many different religions. So in this important, cultural, wealthy city of many different religions, the church was planted. There were a group